Sunday, the 20th of August, 2023. Just after 11 p.m., it was a quiet Sunday night in a small corner of Reckington. The streets were still, the kind of silence where even a single knock on a door seemed louder than it should be. Inside one house, someone moved towards that sound. A few steps down the hallway, a hand reaching for the handle. What happened next would send shockwaves far beyond the street it happened on. It wasn't a burglary in the ordinary sense. It was something calculated, the final act in a string of attacks that had been building quietly for days. Most had no idea that within days police would be piecing together a string of linked attacks, each more violent than the last. What they uncovered would reveal a pattern so brutal it stunned even veteran detectives. This is the story of a crew who turned on their own dealers, and how one night became a fatal reckoning. Andrew Foster was 26 years old, living with his partner Katie Harrison in a modest home in Reckington, Gateshead. Friends described him as laid back, someone who enjoyed a quiet life with those close to him. To most of his neighbours, he was just another young man in the area, someone you might see walking to the shop or chatting outside with friends. But within certain circles, he was known for something else. Beneath the surface, Foster was involved in small-scale dealing. Foster bought cannabis in bulk, turned it into edibles, and resold them in small batches. It wasn't a high-level operation, but it kept money coming in, and it placed him within South Tyneside's drug supply chain. His setup was modest, a kitchen workspace, some equipment, and contacts willing to buy the finished product. The supply came from higher up the chain, and for a time, that arrangement worked. But the drug world rarely runs on trust alone. Foster's name was already known to police from earlier incidents, though he had no record of extreme violence. The real danger came from disputes inside the trade itself. In the months before his death, tensions between Foster and his supplier, Yusef Wynn, began to grow. A cannabis grow had once been installed in Foster's loft arranged through Wynn, with the understanding that he would receive a share of the profits when it was harvested. Foster believed he was due around £60,000 from the crop, but he never saw the money. Not long after, he was allegedly assaulted by Wynn in a separate dispute, punched in the face with a ring that cut his skin. There were also darker suspicions. Foster had once been robbed at gunpoint shortly after buying cannabis from Wynn. He never forgot the timing, though nothing was proven. Still, Foster carried on making edibles. He was part of the same network as the people who would ultimately target him. That familiarity would prove fatal. When the knock came at his door on the 20th of August 2023, he knew the men on the other side. It didn't stop them. The crew was led by Yusef Wynn, 39, from Jarrow, South Tyneside. Known in local criminal circles as a supplier of cannabis, Wynn had built a reputation for control and intimidation. He wasn't the kind of dealer who allowed others to operate freely. In court, prosecutors described him as the orchestrator of a campaign of violence designed to keep his network in check. He was the one who decided who should be taxed, a street term for robbing other dealers of drugs or cash to enforce dominance. All 4 attacks in August 2023 were carried out under his direction, even when he wasn't physically present. We will talk about each attack in a few minutes. His chief enforcer was Kenneth, known as Kenny Fawcett, 33, also from South Tyneside. Fawcett had a history of violent offending and was trusted by Wynn to carry out the most dangerous tasks. He took part in all 4 ammonia attacks, including the fatal raid on Andrew Foster. Detectives described him as Wynn's right-hand man, the one who turned orders into action. John George Wanderless, 33, was brought into the crew for muscle. He joined Fawcett in the final 3 attacks, including the one that left a woman blind and the night Foster was killed. Wanderless also played a role after the crimes, helping burn out the stolen grey Volkswagen Golf used in the raids to try to destroy evidence. He was trusted enough to be at the centre of the most serious incidents. The youngest member, Josh Craig Hawthorne, 22, worked closely with Wynn on the supply side. He wasn't at every scene, but was heavily involved in planning, particularly for the attack on Foster. Hawthorne helped coordinate where the stolen goods would go and acted as a link between Wynne and those on the ground. Together they worked as a close group, where older, more experienced men leading the youngest, all focused on controlling their trade through fear and violence. The motive was simple in concept, brutal in execution. Wynne and his crew believed any dealer making money from their supply owed them a cut, known as a tax. It wasn't about negotiation. If the payment didn't come voluntarily, it would be taken by force. Their method was always the same: a stolen car with covered faces and a bottle of ammonia ready to use. The campaign began on the 9th of August, 2023. The first target was a man in South Shields, known to police as a small-time dealer linked to Wynne's supply chain. That night, Wynne and Fawcett went to his home. The target's family were inside, children included. When the door opened, Fawcett sprayed ammonia directly into the man's face. The fumes filled the room, leaving the victim in agony and others coughing and choking. The attackers left quickly, taking nothing but leaving a message that payment was overdue. 3 days later, on the 12th of August, Fawcett returned, this time with Ruthless. Wynne directed the operation, but didn't go inside. The pair travelled in a stolen grey Volkswagen Golf to a flat in Hebburn, where another dealer was thought to be holding back tax money. The dealer's friend answered the door, an innocent man with no link to the trade. He was sprayed in the face before either attacker said a word. The intended target was threatened inside the property. The friend's injuries were severe enough that his eyesight took months to recover. On the 16th of August, the crew struck again, this time in Jarrow. The target was a dealer recovering from a broken leg, living with his partner, Nicola Dixon. Fawcett and Ruthless came masked, carrying a hammer and ammonia. They entered through the back, confronting the injured man in his living room. When Dixon tried to defend him, she was sprayed directly in the face, twice, even after she fell to the floor. She was left permanently blind in her left eye, which later had to be removed. The attackers stole Class B drugs from the kitchen before leaving. 3 raids in 8 days had built a climate of fear. All victims were known to the crew and part of their own distribution network. These tax raids were meant to keep their dealers in line, a clear warning of what would happen to anyone who withheld drugs or money. Police would later say it was a campaign of violence, calculated to protect, profit, and control. But the pattern didn't stop there. 4 days after the Jarrow raid, the same crew set their sights on someone they knew well. And this time, the violence would go further than it ever had before. It was just after 11 p.m. when the grey Volkswagen Golf pulled up near Andrew Foster's home. Inside were Kenneth Fawcett and John Ruthless. Wynne remained elsewhere, overseeing events, while Josh Hawthorne acted as a point of contact. The Golf was the same car that was already used in earlier raids. Katie Harrison, Foster's girlfriend, had gone upstairs to bed. Foster was downstairs when the knock came. CCTV from nearby captured 2 masked figures approaching the door. As soon as Foster opened it, Fawcett raised a bottle and sprayed ammonia directly into his face. The chemical burned his eyes and airways instantly. Foster staggered backwards, struggling to breathe and gasping that it was ammonia. The attackers moved past him into the kitchen, leaving him collapsed and fighting for air. They searched cupboards and drawers, taking his edible-making equipment, cannabis, and other items before heading back out into the night. Upstairs, Katie heard the struggle. She came down to find Foster collapsed, his breathing labored and his skin already reacting to the chemical. She called 999, following the operator's instructions to start CPR when he became unresponsive. Paramedics arrived within minutes and took him to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Gateshead. The ammonia had caused severe damage to his respiratory system, depriving his brain of oxygen. Despite emergency treatment, Foster's condition worsened, and he died in hospital the next day. In the moments after leaving Andrew Foster's home, Fawcett and Ruthless didn't disappear into hiding. Instead, they drove the stolen grey Volkswagen Golf away from Recanton and towards a nearby petrol station. The clock had barely ticked past midnight when CCTV captured them stepping inside. What happened next at that petrol station we will discuss in a few minutes. The Golf itself had been a key part of their operations. Stolen before the first ammonia attack, it had been used in all 4 raids and fitted with altered plates. But within 48 hours of Foster's death, the car vanished from the streets. On 22nd August 2023, the Golf was discovered in Wallsend, burned down to its frame, a deliberate fire set to wipe out any forensic link to the attacks. The fire had stripped away much of the interior, melted plastic pooling at the footwells, yet not all traces were gone. Investigators were able to link the vehicle to multiple crime scenes through CCTV and automatic number plate recognition records. The Collision Investigation Unit examined video and audio from earlier sightings and, despite the fire damage, matched chassis identifiers and distinctive features. A grey/silver Enca 6 diesel with a mismatched wing panel. To the car seen circling the scenes on the 12th, 16th and 20th of August. The burning of the Golf was meant to sever the trail. Instead, it became another piece of the puzzle. One more step in a chain of evidence leading directly back to the crew. The first call landed just after 11 p.m. on Sunday, the 20th of August, 2023. Ambulance control reporting a chemical assault at Ayton Terrace, Reckington. Officers arrived within minutes, secured the scene, and seized Andrew Foster's phone. Crime scene specialists were called in early. Ammonia evaporates quickly, so any trace evidence had to be captured fast. There were no eyewitnesses to the attack itself, little usable CCTV at the door, and the chemical would leave scant forensics. House-to-house inquiries produced fragments. One camera on the street caught a car pulling in, executing a U-turn. Another picked up 2 figures moving away at the rear of the property. An audio-enabled camera captured Foster's screams and the sound of an engine pulling off. From the blurred footage, detectives thought the car resembled a grey Volkswagen Golf, but they couldn't be sure. By 9:30 p.m. the next day, Foster had died in hospital. The inquiry became a murder investigation. Detectives then recovered high-quality CCTV from a petrol station on John Reed Road, South Shields, recorded within an hour and a half of the Reckington attack. The Golf pulled in. The driver walked to the kiosk. Cameras captured his face and a distinctive neck tattoo. Audio picked up him, calling to his passenger for a drink order, addressing him as Kenny, and the reply asking for a strawberry yogurt drink. The driver with the tattoo was identified as John Wandless. Kenny became the priority lead. Telecoms work tightened the net. Cell site data placed Wandless and Kenneth Fawcett in the Reckington area at the time of the murder, with bursts of calls between them before and after. Analysis of the Golf's movement showed it spent most of August north of the river, crossing south only on the 12th, 16th, and 20th, the dates of 3 attacks. Detectives also linked 3 earlier ammonia assaults in South Shields, Hebburn and Jarrow. Initially, victims wouldn't engage, but specialist officers revisited them. Statements were taken, and searchers found relevant activity on Fawcett's phone connected to the earlier incidents. Surveillance began in the days after the major clue to the suspects. Officers monitored known addresses linked to the suspects, logging vehicle movements, visitors, and any sign of disposal of clothing or items that might connect them to the raids. A public major incident portal was opened to gather further footage and tips. Piece by piece, the pattern solidified. The same car, same method, and the same phones belonged to the same crew. The case was ready to move from identification to arrest. Warrants were prepared for multiple properties across South Tyneside. News of Andrew Foster's death spread quickly through Reckington. By the next morning, flowers and handwritten notes began appearing against the railings near Ayton Terrace. Neighbours who had known him since childhood came quietly to pay their respects, some leaving tributes in the same spot where police tapes still marked the crime scene. His partner, Katie Harrison, spoke of the moment she found him, the shock of seeing him losing his life with every stage. She described him as the person she built her life with, someone she thought she would grow old alongside. Friends remembered a young man with an easygoing nature, someone who kept his circle small and was happiest in the company of those he trusted. In court, his mother described him as loving and caring, saying his loss had left a gap that would never be filled. She spoke about the long hours spent at his hospital bedside, hoping for a sign of recovery that never came. His death, she said, had broken the family completely. Days later, friends organized a balloon release in his memory, with dozens of people gathering to mark what they called a life cut short by pointless violence. For the people who knew him, the headlines about drugs and disputes would never define him. To them, he was simply Andy, a son, a partner, and a friend who would never come home. Now, let's back to the investigation point where we left. The first to be arrested was Ruthless. Armed officers moved early in the morning, catching him at a friend's flat in South Shields. He was taken into custody without incident, but his phone, recovered from the scene, would later yield location data matching the August attacks. Fawcett was picked up hours later during a traffic stop, his car boxed in by unmarked police vehicles. In the back seat, officers found clothing similar to that worn in the CCTV footage from the petrol station. His hands were swabbed for chemical traces before he was even taken from the roadside. Hawthorne was located the next day. Detectives found him at a terraced property in Jarrow, where a search uncovered messages between him and Wynne discussing movements on the night of Foster's death. Those exchanges placed him as the communications link, relaying updates between the attackers and the man in charge. Wynne himself was arrested last. Officers from Northumbria Police's Firearms Support Unit raided his home in Jarrow at dawn. Inside, they found high-value watches, cash, and documents consistent with a controlling role in the supply network. He refused to answer most questions in the interview, offering no explanation for the phone data, witness accounts, or his connection to the stolen Golf. By the end of that week, all four men were in custody. What began as a chemical assault investigation had now become a murder case with a complete cast of suspects, each tied to the attacks by a mix of CCTV, phone evidence, and witness testimony. The stage was set for the trial that would lay out their crimes in full. On 26th of July, 2024, in Newcastle Crown Court, the case against the four men was brought to a verdict. The prosecution laid out a meticulously linked series of ammonia attacks and the digital and forensic evidence that we already have covered. Defense for each of the accused centered on denying involvement in the attacks. Wynne's legal team argued he had not taken part in person and disputed that the evidence proved he was directing the others. Fawcett and Ruthless both denied being present during the assaults, with their lawyers challenging the identification evidence put forward by the prosecution. Hawthorne maintained that he had not been involved in planning or carrying out any of the incidents. Mr. Justice Dove dismissed these defences, stating that the evidence painted a clear and consistent picture of each man's role in the conspiracy. He described the offences as murder for gain, calling the attacks cruel and terrifying. He condemned the use of ammonia as a weapon capable of causing irreversible harm and branded Wynne's enforcement strategy as a curse on our communities. The sentences followed, presented in order of culpability and role. Yusuf Wynne, aged 39, the leader and strategist of the operation, was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 33 years before he can be considered for parole. Kenneth Fawcett, aged 33, the principal enforcer, received life imprisonment with a minimum term of 32 years. John Ruthless, aged 33, who assisted in disposing of evidence by burning the getaway car, was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 31 years. Josh Hawthorne, aged 22, identified as the coordinator and planner, received life imprisonment, subject to a minimum term of 22 years. What do you think about the sentences and the case itself? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you want more true UK crime stories told exactly as they happened, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications on. There's always another case to uncover.